issues all over Africa, and Africans always find ways to talk about them, social media being one of such. Hello, this is Trends. I am Bumi Obanau. From north to south, east to west, we discuss issues you are talking about, and we give you a say. With me in the studio is our online producer, Moses Omogena, who is always interacting with our online community. Right, Moses?
Yes, and a whole lot has been happening. But before I say anything else, I want to say that, this is the very first show of The Trend, right from our studios, from TVC News Africa, and we are all thrilled and excited to be here. Now, before excitement gets the best of us, we've been getting a lot of tweets and comments from you guys. And for those of you who are just watching the show for the first time, feel free to join our online community at, or tweet at us at TVC Trends, or comment on our Facebook page at TVC News Trends, or you can send us your email at thetrends@tvcnews.tv. Now, a whole lot has been happening, in spite of, what's trending all over Africa. Now, all the way from South Africa, for instance, we have the the Oscar Pistorius trial. It's the fourth day, actually, of the case. And generally, there seems to be like a back and forth movement. Now, so far, what's been determined is that, yes, his girlfriend, Raven Stippen, was killed by his gun. It was killed by him, in fact. But we do not know if the intent was premeditated or, it was an accident. So the court is yet to define, to decide that. Now, coming back to Nigeria here, a whole lot, tragic lot has been happening, ranging from Boko Haram insurgents. At least 75 kids have been killed in the past 8 weeks. And in fact, as a matter of fact, today there was a morning walk by women and kids all around Lagos in southeast Nigeria, and ranging from the CBN crisis, the fuel crisis, and all that. So we can sadly say that it's been a black month for Nigeria and the rest of Africa generally. Sadly. So, Bumi, what are we dishing?
Okay, today we look at anti-gay laws in Africa. Uganda has joined the list of African countries who have signed imposing harsh penalty laws for homosexuality. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni, defying protests from rights groups, criticism and threats from Western donors, went ahead to sign the law. More of this when we come back.
The Ugandan government seems not to be bothered by criticisms against its anti-gay law. The World Bank recently postponed a $90 million loan to Uganda's health system over the law that toughened punishment for gays. The Ugandan government has played down the courts and international criticism, saying the country can do without Western aid.
Aid is not charity. Aid is trade. They loan money at interest, and therefore they should not behave as if they are doing a favor to Uganda or to Africa when they trade in their money. Since it is a loan, Uganda was going to repay. Uganda can still seek for this loan from other sources, perhaps even on better terms.
On the streets of the capital, Kampala, the new law is still a hot topic among residents.
As Ugandans, we have our own law and African culture that govern us. Every country has got its own law. We cannot lean on donors because we want funds from them, aid from them, and we abuse our own culture.
Well, if there's one thing we can see from that report is that a lot of people on ground in Uganda support the law. So it wasn't an unpopular decision by the president to sign that bill into law.
Exactly. Majority of Ugandans seem to, hold their ground. In fact, they're saying, the West can keep their aid, but we want to preserve our African culture. We want to make decisions for ourselves, regardless of what anybody thinks externally.
Which is pretty similar to what happened, or what's happening in Nigeria, when people are saying, this is what we want, so you do not have a right to tell us what we should do.
But other people are also raising questions. I mean, fine, we know that Ugandans are, trying to hold their laws in solidarity and all that, but can they really sustain it? That's the big question.
And that is what we'll be talking about. Uganda is now the 38th African country to sign the anti-gay law anti-gay bill into law. The president signed this bill, and the bill is saying that you can get life imprisonment if you're seen to be homosexual in any way. Now, the Western world has said it's a cut of AIDS to Uganda. The big question is, should our cultural differences determine our relationship with the Western world? And is it necessary to impose harsh laws against homosexuality? Joining us to discuss this is human rights expert and activist, Barrister Wahab Shittu. And via Skype, we have Mark Sheknell, who is a Dutch columnist based in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Wahab, thank you very much for being a part of the show.
It's my pleasure to be here.
And Mark, thank you very much for being a part of this show. Now, I'll start with you, Mark. You live in Uganda. Can you give us, paint a picture of what Ugandans feel concerning threats by the Western world to cut off all aids to, Uganda? Well, threats by certain countries in the Western world. Mark?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
From Kampala, indeed. Well, I think the general feeling in Uganda among people here is that they are tired of threats by Western countries to cut off aid. And the majority of people I talk to, the stories I read, is people saying, you know what, why don't you keep your aid? Because people here perceive that threat to cut off aid, they perceive that threat as a way by Western countries to influence what Ugandans should or should not think and what laws the country should or should not make.
Okay. Wahab, before we even dwell more on this subject, should our cultural differences really determine our relationship with the Western world? So if what I believe in is quite different from what you believe in, should that affect our relationship in any way?
I think it should not affect the relationship between countries, given the fact that it is a fact that countries are really different in the way they perceive realities. They have cultural differences, and they have differences in terms of history and in terms of heritage. And this diversity is what makes the world, a beautiful place. And so in our relationship with the rest of the world, we should be conscious of these differences. We should be conscious of the fact that some, parts of the world, certain parts of the world have different values. For instance, European values is quite different from African values. European culture is quite different from African culture. Yeah, our sense of history is different. Our heritage is also different. So I think all of this must be factored into the equation. When we must be conscious of all of this when we relate with each other. Not with a view, that is why you see nearly all the international instruments, beginning from the United Nations Charter, which is the dominant international instrument, from where you now have other international instruments by way of protocols, covenants, and all that. It recognizes the fact that you must not discriminate on account of race, on account of tribe, on account of language or some other differences. Because the reality is that we are different. But beyond all these differences, in spite of all differences, we must be able to say, forge relationships without regard to these differences, without discriminating on account of these differences. So when people begin to use differences as a basis for relationship, then the conclusion that is reached ultimately is that you are discriminated.
Okay, let me hold you there. Now, Mark, I'm going to come to you now. I'm sure you must have heard what Mr. Wahab said. Now, let me ask you this. In view of all the sanctions and all the withdrawal of the aids, from African countries who seem to have some, opposite laws, in quotes. Now, some people argue that the masses may have to bear the brunt of it all, as opposed to, political leaders and the government in power. Do you think that in that regard, that withdrawal of aids and the sanctioning is a wise one, is a wise step? What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure if the aid that is now being frozen or withdrawn, if that is actually aid that goes to the Ugandan government, not to organizations that, like civil organizations. It is only money so far that goes to the government. the Western countries argue that they don't want to fund a government anymore that put in place a law criminalizing homosexuality, the Western countries add the other aid does continue, the aid that is supposed to reach the ordinary people in Uganda.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Now, we'll come back to you. Just stay right there. Now, before we go further, I'm going to read out some tweets. Like I said earlier on, we've been having a lot of comments, tweets, and emails from our social media world. Now, I'm going to take the very first tweet, and this comes from Christy Angel. And she says that the Western world should not try to impose values on us. Let us, as Africans, stick to our conservative lifestyle. And also, she went further to say that our cultural differences should not deter our relationship with the Western world. Do you want to react to that?
Yes.
I'm sure that's in view of what you said earlier on.
That comment, I'm in full agreement with that comment.
Okay.
You know, people, if you respect me, then you must respect my values.
True.
You must respect where I'm coming from. That is the essence of respect. When you are not prepared to respect my values and what I stand for, then how do you expect me to respect you?
But what about comments that say that when two international bodies are dealing with each other, there are certain requirements like you cannot violate human rights, requirements like you must protect the minority. And when you breach these requirements, then you've breached an agreement between the both of us.
And some might even have consequences.
And this is one of such.
Let me tell you, when you talk in terms of minimum standard of behavior that all countries, across the world must conform with, you must also have regard with certain kinds of, sensibilities that you cut across that you must also respect. For instance, the whole world condemns genocide. The whole world also regards corruption as an international crime. Terrorism too is in that realm. In that same analysis, piracy and all that. Those are offenses considered against crime against humanity. But outside those offenses, people are entitled to go to heaven the way they want. You see, under international law, the sovereign countries of the world, each of the sovereign countries of the world are entitled to sovereignty. And when you talk of sovereignty, what are you talking about? The right to be able to dictate and control their own affairs without interference. International law only recognizes interference in areas where you are trying to breach the minimum standards of standards of behavior.
We will continue and take up from where you just stopped, but for now let's go on a break because we have so many varying opinions and I'm sure you'd like to hear more. But let's go on a break for now.